Hey, welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm who?
Representative Gary Hopper.
That's Honorable
Gary
Representative. That's kind of
Hopper,
redundant,
yeah.
though. This is Josh Solomon, and our guest today is Ken Bossy.
Mm-hmm.
I get it right.
You did.
That is a hard thing for me to do, is get the guest's name right when I've just met them tonight. So
Good job.
So the worst thing that ever happened to me my whole life happened today.
Yeah, the worst thing.
The worst thing ever.
Absolute worst.
I've had cancer, and parents have died, and all that stuff. But the worst thing ever, I was on the way here, and I was eating that dark chocolate, because you know the stuff that tastes like crap, but you eat it because it's not bad for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was having some of that, and I'm driving down 93, and a piece fell off, and I was looking for it and brushing it off, and it was underneath my tie, and it melted all over my shirt.
Yeah, let folks see.
So if you don't look, the tie covers it up pretty good. If I didn't tell you about it. Oh,
Chocolate, that's good for you.
I'm not wrapped too tight. So I invited Ken on, and I have to hand it to you, because I have been looking, because I understand we're talking tonight about biblical prophecy, and the reason I wanted to talk about that is it is what led me to God. An example of that is Isaiah 53, which talks about, here, let me look at it. I can do that. That's like it in a minute. If you pardon, Josh, say something really cool while I'm looking this up.
Something really cool.
How cool? No, that's the wrong
Prophecy.
path.
So how did you come across Ken?
Because
when
I
thinking about
talked,
these prophecies.
because I actually know a lot of people in his congregation,
Oh.
and one of them is Dave Love, who is one of my accomplices up at the State House.
So where is your congregation?
It's in Raymond, New Hampshire.
Raymond?
Yeah. Yeah, so Dave is a state rep also, and they must have met up there in the wonderful
Well,
land
where's
of
Dave?
Concord.
Why isn't he here with us tonight?
I don't know. I didn't invite him because he's,
Oh.
I'm trying to find somebody to run against him.
Oh.
Just to be a jerk, not because he's a
Gotcha.
bad vote.
Gotcha.
I actually like him, but I found this girl, Lorna, I think her name was, at the State House.
Hazing, huh? You're hazing him.
Yeah, basically,
Yeah,
yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah. But I know Darlene Pollock,
Oh, sure, yeah.
one of my favorite human beings on the entire planet.
Mm-hmm.
I had her on the show, and people may have watched it then. And I says, "Oh, you've had an interesting life." And she just looked at me with this dumbfounded look. Yeah, I wouldn't call it interesting. And then she went into it. I felt like about this big, you know. She's had a tough life.
Yeah, she's
but
quite a
she
lady.
is such a beautiful human.
Mm.
Okay, so Isaiah 53. Who has this? I love this. You correct me if I'm wrong. Isaiah was written 500 or 600 years before Christ.
Around that, yeah.
Okay, and people, this is so accurate that some people, biblical quote unquote scholars, claim that it was rewritten to fit the life of Christ by the Christians. Well, that was a common theory up until they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they actually found scrolls that date back 2,000 years or more that still have this text.
Right.
So Isaiah 53 is, who has believed our message, and whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of the dry ground. He had no beauty. I love this, because if you watch any movie about Christ, he's always handsome.
Yeah.
The Bible says he was not good looking. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in the appearance that should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, and a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgression, and he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. I mean, it's so powerful and so beautiful. And what struck me about that passage also, because sometimes when you read the Bible, there's some passages just stick in your head and you're trying to figure them out. And it kept saying he was. Everything is in past tense. So you're wondering why Isaiah, 500 years before Christ, is talking in past tense. And I kept praying about it, and finally it occurred to me is that Isaiah is being shown Christ's life. So to him, it was in the past because he saw it. And that was kind of my epiphany. And there's passages like that point to the actual life of Christ, that confirm that Christ is the Messiah, he is the Savior.
Right.
And then there's other prophecies that talk about his return. And I am not good enough to lay those all out. That's why I've been trying to find a pastor who will do that, but most of them are afraid of the subject.
Yeah, well, it can be a difficult subject to grapple with, that's for sure.
So that's why I invited you, because I believe we're very close. Like I posted on Facebook, it says no one knows that if you hear a pastor get up and say Jesus is coming back in 2002, or, well, it's too late for that, 2022.
No, there were some that said.
Yeah, no,
there's been
Y2K
plenty.
was one of them.
Yep.
And here's a good example. My friend says, well, I heard from God that he's coming back at Y2K. I said, well, I'm writing a book, 2001 Reasons Why He's Coming Back. He's not coming back in 2001. So it says clearly in the Bible, nobody knows the day or the time. Even Christ didn't know the exact day. But he did say that just like summer's near because you see the buds on the trees, so will you know Christ is about to return.
Right.
So anyway, that's why I invited you on to tell us what those buds on the trees are. What do you see, and how does I'll shut up.
Well, you hit the nail right on the head with talking about the prophetic element of the Bible. That's something that people can't refute. It's indisputable that there are things in the Bible that no man could have ever known without the mind of God revealing it to them. And so when you look at like Psalms 22, for instance, which is referred to as the crucifixion psalm, written, hundreds of years before Rome ever existed and Rome ever invented, the death penalty by crucifixion. And it talks about his hands were pierced and his side was pierced and all these different things that were, very depictive of Roman crucifixion. And yet hundreds, if not 1,000 years before Christ ever went to the cross. Right. So those kind of prophetic elements in the scripture are things that, you have to really grapple with, because there's no way of, figuring that kind of stuff out. So, but when we talk about the second coming of Christ, from the beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible, there is a recurrent theme that happens again and again and again and again, and that is the day of the Lord, what's known as the day of the Lord, or the coming of the Messiah. And one of the things that they didn't know back then, the Jewish scholars and things like that, and it's what's called mountaintop prophecy. They looked and they saw a mountain, and they said, God is coming. God is going to visit this earth. Messiah is going to come. And so Jesus...
So when you mean mountaintop prophecy, in other words, they're looking at a distance at this other mountain or a period of time, and they think all of that focuses on that point in time.
Correct. So they see a mountaintop, and they don't realize that right behind it is another mountaintop with a great big valley in between it, and they don't see that. They just see Messiah is coming. And so what they didn't see is that Messiah was going to come, and he came the first time with the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. It's another indisputed fact that Jesus historically cannot be refuted. He lived, he existed, he was crucified. The discussion comes in, and who is he? So what they didn't see is that between his first coming and his second coming was this whole big valley of, so far, what's been 2,000 years of what's referred to as the church age. And so, God has been dealing with the world through his church. But Israel has always been God's timepiece. Israel is sort of the hot spot of what lets us know when end times are beginning to percolate and starting to gain some momentum. And that's why I always tell people, keep your eyes on Israel. And so, as a matter of fact, one of the prophetic elements of end times is that since the time of Jesus, in the year 70 AD, the Roman general Titus sacked Jerusalem, murdered over 1 million Jews, the rest of them scattered around the world, and Jerusalem and Israel was no longer a Jewish nation.
Right.
It wasn't until after World War II. So I think around in 1945 that the British turned Israel back over to the Jews, and they started coming back out of Russia and all the other parts of the world. So basically, if you look at that time span, that was almost 2,000 years of time that biblical prophecy couldn't have been fulfilled, because the Jews were not back in their promised land. And that wasn't until around 1945, 46, they had, I think, the Six-Day War, and then 49, another.
I think it was Mark Twain went through there, because back in the 1800s, there was a lot of authors that would write these grand books, and then they would go around and sell them. And a very popular type of book was on trips. Mm-hmm. So he went through it on a trip through Jerusalem, Israel, and he basically described it as desolate.
Right.
So the Jews haven't been in Israel really. I think they started coming back in the late 1800s, but there's been nothing there.
Right. And so, now they're a people, and now we recognize their statehood, but it's hotly contested because of the way things fell apart after World War II and the redistribution of land, and then the Six-Day War, when 11 Muslim nations came against them, and they single-handedly defeated their enemies and recaptured a lot of land. And so a big thing in the news today is land for peace, land for peace. So you get this little tiny nation of Israel surrounded by massive Islamic Muslim nations, and they always want more land for peace, more land for peace, where you'll never have peace in that Middle East region. You never will, because it's the timepiece of end times. Things are going to heat up there and basically catapult us into what's called the end time scenario.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we look at, we're going to look at a little bit of the Book of Revelation tonight, because that's what everybody wants to talk about. And but before you get there, you have to go back to the Book of Daniel.
Right.
Daniel is a very prophetic book and talks about a lot of things. And in the Book of Daniel, and again, one of the things I like about the Bible versus other religious books is the Bible is based in history. There has never, ever been an archaeological discovery that has refuted the Bible.
Right.
Every archaeological find has only confirmed the history of the Bible.
Right.
So in the book of Daniel, you had Daniel, who was a Jew who was carried away into Babylon as a prisoner and became elevated to being very high in command. And the king has a dream, and he forgot it, but it tormented him. And so he was going to murder all the magicians and all the fortune tellers because nobody could tell him the dream. And so Daniel comes on the scene, and Daniel says...
That's because he was tormented, so he told him, it says, I want you to tell the interpretation of the dream. He says, okay, just tell us what the dream was, and we'll tell you, which was easy, right?
Yeah.
And the king said, no, I don't remember that.
Right.
You have to tell me what the dream was and interpret it.
Right.
That was the rub.
That was the big rub. Yeah, that was a hard, because he could, if he gave them the interpretation or the meaning of the dream, they could just guess at what it meant. And,
right. Yeah.
So, but Daniel actually prayed and fasted, and God showed him the dream and revealed to the king, this is the dream you had. You saw a huge statue. Its head was gold. Its arms and its torso were silver. Its loins were brass. Its legs were iron. And then he said, here's the interpretation. You, O king, Babylon, the government of Babylon, you are the head of gold. After you is going to come another superpower, a world power, the Medes and the Persians, and 2 arms. And then after them is going to come the loins of brass, which would be Alexander the Great in the Greek Empire. And then after that was going to come these legs of iron, which was the Roman Empire, which was divided into Constantinople and Rome. And then 10 toes in the end times. He said in the end times there will be these 10 toes of iron mixed with clay. and then a stone would come and hit those toes and shatter it, and the stone would become a mountain and cover the entire earth.
Right.
And so, so basically, what you have are these superpowers, these worldwide governments, and God's kingdom coming in the end of time and doing away with government. So what people don't realize is when you talk about the book of Revelation, it really is God dealing with human government.
Right.
Because government is a necessary evil, because man cannot govern himself outside of a relationship with God.
Right.
That's why I think it was John Adams that said our Constitution is completely inadequate to govern a non-religious people.
Correct.
So, so man can't even govern himself, but he needs help, and so government comes along, and of course, government only knows one thing, and that's to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it becomes powerful, and where there's power, there's corruption, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
And so then you get despots and tyrants and dictators and all this kind of thing. So, so basically. That's the second coming of Jesus Christ, is when he's going to come back again to Israel and basically eradicate man's government and establish his government over the entire world.
Right.
And that's a time when it says, people will beat their swords into plowshares, and the lion will lay down with the lamb. It's going to be a restoration of the way God intended it to be all the way back in the beginning.
Garden of Eden, yeah.
Right, in creation. So now we come to the book of Revelation, which basically in the Greek is the word apocalypto, which means an unveiling, a revelation. So when you think of a car company comes out with a new model car and they have it covered with a sheet and nobody knows until there's the big unveiling of what that model looks like. So the book of Revelation is not necessarily predictive, like everybody thinks it's prophecy. And there's an element of prophecy in it, obviously, but it's more a revealing. That's what it means, the very first verse, the revelation of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So when Jesus came the first time and established the church and started the church and introduced salvation for the first time to mankind through his blood, the church, took off running and basically, I don't know if you'd say turned the world upside down or turned it the right side up, and started covering the globe. But in that early church, they really only knew Jesus in his humanity. They knew he was the Son of God, and then especially after the resurrection and his ascension, they got the big picture. But shortly thereafter, they started being really persecuted by the Roman government, and they were being martyred, thrown in the Colosseums, the gladiatorial games, and so the Christians were really beginning to wonder: do the governments of man win? Like, are we losing? Is this whole thing not going to happen?
Oh, one of the things you mentioned, the tormenting the Christians. One of the most beautiful thing ever, beautiful, it's horrible actually, but cool things I learned from the Bible is that if you look at the followers of Jesus Christ at the time, the Paul, the Peter, and all those people, if they were just trying to deceive people, like if it was a con game, right? They wouldn't have. What happened to them never would have happened, because people. I don't know. You know it better than I do, but those people were actually, I think, crucified upside down. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't really believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, they wouldn't have allowed themselves to be crucified upside down for his testimony.
Yeah.
The torture those people went through because they believed in Jesus Christ is not something a person that was trying to scam anybody would ever go through.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe one person could concoct something delusional and probably die for it. But, you had more than the 12. The Bible talks about the 70, then the 120, and then Paul says that Jesus even appeared to as many as 500 at one time. So if you've got 500 people, and they're now being persecuted and beaten and tortured, like you said, crucified, thrown to the lions. There's no way that they would go through those kinds of deaths over a facade or over a lie. Somebody would crack and say, "Hey, wait a minute, we made this whole thing up."
Yeah, exactly.
So, but the courage displayed is proof that they experienced something that was life changing.
Yeah,
a game changer. Absolutely, a big thing. So now we have this church that only knew Jesus in his humanity, And John is one of the last apostles that's still alive, and he's on a Roman prison island called Patmos. And it's on this island that he gets this revelation where Jesus appears to him. And so the book of Revelation is just that. It's a new revelation of Jesus. So in chapter 1, you get this very descriptive imagery of Jesus with his face shining like the sun, his voice like many waters, his feet like burned brass. All of these things that, humanly, they're remembering this Jesus who they lived with for 3.5 years, who died on the cross. Now they're seeing this glorified, basically, God, the Son of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit of Trinity. And now they're seeing, a new revelation of Jesus they've never seen before. Like he's glorified, he's God. There's none beside him. And so then you go into chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation, and Jesus turns to the church, and he starts commending them, and then he criticizes them, and then he warns them. So these 7 churches. And that's a revelation of Jesus and his church, that he's Lord of the church. Then from chapters 4 through chapters 19, you have what's called the tribulation period, which most people say, it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world. And it's not. The world is not going to end. It's the end of an age.
Okay.
It's just the end of an age. So, that's when all these horrible things are happening that you read about, and, movies are made about, and you got these locusts coming out of the ground, and you have the mark of the beast, and you have the Antichrist.
You see what locusts are doing in the Middle East right now?
No kidding, right?
It's not just the Middle East. They've swarmed all the way over into China.
In China?
Wow.
They've already, through Thailand, and so there was it's come from Africa through the Middle East, and it's already, so it's not just one local area. It's
Right.
the
Wow.
entire Middle
Right.
East into Asia.
I was talking with somebody about that, and they were saying that, so in Africa, where I guess a lot of this swarm has started, usually they're adult locusts, and they do their thing for as long as they do, and then they die out. But because they've had an incredibly wet year, they're saying this is going to go second generation. It's going to get that much bigger because they're going to keep breeding. They're not going to die out because of desert heat. They're just going to keep breeding. So,
Right. The weather is such that they're able to continue to breed without having to go into that
Right.
hibernation period.
yeah. So it's crazy stuff happening. So then after this tribulation period, which I'm going to go back in and touch some about that because that's what a lot of people are interested in. Then at the end of that, Jesus comes back, and you have the 1,000-year reign, or the millennial reign of Christ on the earth, which is a time of peace and tranquility. Then at the end of that, you have one more resurgence of evil, and then it's final judgment, and we go on to
Done.
Right, everything is over at that point, and new heavens and new earth, and that's going to be the glorious time. So all of these 5 stages are all revealing Christ in a new way that we'd never seen before. So that's why it's called the Revelation. It's not like the revelation of the end of the world. It's not the revelation of the Antichrist. It's the revelation of Jesus, his lordship over everything. He is the uncontested champion. And so one of the things that happens around these times is obviously Israel has to be, or the Jews rather, have to be relocated in Israel, which happened, as we mentioned.
It says, correct me if I'm wrong, that basically right near the end, the Jews will return from the 4 corners of the earth.
Correct.
And that has never happened before.
Right.
But it has in the last, since 1946. It's because there was a release of the Russian Jews were basically held back, but finally the Russians said, "Okay, go."
Yeah.
And they all exited. Came from the only ones that haven't returned, which kind of scares me, are the ones from the United States.
Correct. Yeah.
So when we see the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States, it kind of scares me because I have a lot of Jewish friends, and it bothers me. But it is what it is.
Right. Right.
It's definitely happening, but there's also, I don't know, from a political standpoint, there's a large portion of the Jews in the United States who are not supporters of Israel, who are not traditionally Israel supporters.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we see a lot of that in the Northeast, in New York and Connecticut. And
Yeah, very secular.
Yeah.
Very secular. Something will probably happen, though, that will shake them to their roots, and there probably will be a migration back to Israel before these things really start unfolding. But here's the thing: these things can unfold very fast. What needs to happen for biblical prophecy to be fulfilled can happen really, really fast. So some of the things that we talked about in Daniel, when Daniel saw these 10 toes made of iron and clay, which were basically part of the Roman Empire, is that the Roman Empire never really was destroyed or overthrown. It just kind of melted away. And so what's going to happen is it's going to be a resurgence, 10 toes. And so what most scholars believe is that there's going to be a 10-nation confederacy that will be the revised Roman Empire. And you got to understand that the Roman Empire went from northern Africa all the way up through the Mesopotamia region, all of Europe, even into Great Britain, a huge world superpower. So the Antichrist is going to rule over this 10-nation confederacy. And whether that is the EU, where we see Europe coming together as confederacy, whether it's Islamic nations that are confederacy, that they're still part of that empire as well. We don't know. Maybe it's both, and that's why it's a mixture of clay and iron, because there's something there that's not bringing
not
unification.
congealing completely,
Yeah.
but it'll look like a unit, but it won't be truly united.
Right. So, so that has to happen, but we can see that it's happening. I mean, it's not a long shot to say there's going to be a revised Roman Empire and made up of 10 different regions or states or countries or whatever it might be. And so you have that, which is something that can be fulfilled pretty close. And then you have in the book of Revelation this mention of the kings of the East coming and warring against Israel. And in the book of Revelation, you understand, again, this was written 2,000 years ago, roughly. It mentions an army of 200 million. So here's another prophetic element of Scripture that they have to wrap their minds around. When John wrote this, there wasn't even 200 million people in that whole Mediterranean region.
There wasn't 200
Not
million
even
in the
on
whole
Earth.
world.
Not even in the whole world. And so it's not until today that we see that China can field an army of 200 million, India can field an army of 200 million, and probably an Islamic confederacy could probably do that, as well as maybe, I don't know if a European one, I don't think a European one could, but.
No.
So here's, again, just like the Jews coming back to Israel, something that's never happened in 2,000 years, the ability to actually man an army of 200 million wasn't possible for 2,000 years, and now in our lifetime, in our generation, we see that happening, and we see it, right within our reach. And then it talks about there's going to be these two men of God that are going to be, they're going to be Jews, and they're going to be prophets, and they're going to be preaching in Israel around this time. And it says that the Antichrist has them murdered, and they lay on the streets for 3 days, and the entire world sees this. So here's another prophetic element, because back then there was no way the entire world could witness an event. But with the advent of TV and the World Wide Web, and now it's
Quite easy.
It's a common.
Well, isn't that very specifically one of the 7 prophecies? Is instant worldwide communication, so
Sure.
that we can be told something instantly?
Right. So, with today's technology, we see it on a daily basis. We see things happening in China. We see things happening anywhere cameras can film. And so something that was not possible for over 2,000 years is now possible. So when you look at, the Jews back in Israel, armies of 200 million, worldwide broadcasting that can be live, these are things that are coming together now in our lifetime, so that should get people's attention. Whether you believe in biblical prophecy or not, you have to look at what the Bible said 2,000 years ago and what is now possible in our lifetime and say, holy smokes.
Well, that's the Revelations 13 says that basically near the end, that no man will be able to buy or sell without the mark of the beast in their right hand or forehead.
Right.
Well, 2,000 years ago, they were still bartering with chickens.
Right.
We're now so completely dependent on food being shipped from here and there. We're now at a point where people could be all put on one monetary system,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody would be able to buy or sell unless they accept that mark, which could be a microchip. It could be a dozen different things. But it's only now in history that prophecy is actually possible.
Right. So it's funny because in Raymond, where I'm from, there is a Walmart distribution center that was built a few years back. And I was fortunate enough to have a tour of the facility with a group of about 20 people, business people and community people. And we're going through this, just an incredible building. I mean, 180 loading docks. A truck is not in one dock longer than 30 minutes. So, I mean, they're coming and going like crazy. I want to say 70 or like 5 miles of conveyor belts inside this building. And so you got conveyor belts and flippers, and this truck is unloading television sets, and they're coming down these conveyor belts, and there's flipper systems, and they're going here, there, and everywhere, so that these 3 TVs are going into that truck, as well as produce and other things that are going to go to Bangor, Maine. And all the stuff, and there's computers reading these barcodes and all of this stuff happening where it's flawless. And so this guy's giving us this tour, and he's talking about how these things process, a billion pieces of information, in a day, or crazy. I mean, I forgot the statistics, but it was just mind-boggling. So at the end of the tour, he says, "Does anybody have any questions?" And by this time, I had positioned myself to the outside of the crowd so that I had everybody's attention. And I said, "It's amazing you're showing us this technology." I said, because the Bible says that in the end days, there will be a system that will be able to record every single human being on planet Earth. And I said, just from this demonstration, you're saying that system is here. And he was as sober and somber as could be. And he looked at me and he goes, "Yes, it is."
Wow.
And I was like, yeah. And I think everybody in that crowd said the same thing. They were probably like, wow, just to get that. So, so the mark, it's interesting you brought that up. The mark in the Greek is the word stitzo, and it's where we get the word stigmata, which means a mark.
Yeah.
But stitzo, literally translated, means a prick or a stick.
Oh.
So what do they do with these chips, these RV chips? They put them in a needle, hypodermic, and they prick them or stick them into your hand or wherever they're going to. Usually, right now, they're doing the web of the hand because it's a fleshy component of the hand. Again, not saying that is the mark of the beast, but
It could be.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could really fit. And again, that becomes a method of tracking finances, health records. One of the things I've noticed is that it's the frog in the cooker, illustration.
Yeah.
How do you boil a frog? You don't throw him in a pan of hot water. You throw him in a pan of cool water and put it on simmer. And as it gets hotter and hotter, he falls asleep, gets sleepy, and then you cook him. And a lot of times,
They don't taste very good, though.
I've never had them. I
Yeah,
don't want
I
to.
have.
Not unless you put it in a lot of sauces or something. I don't know.
Barbecue sauce.
Yeah. But a lot of times, these things always come out as solutions to problems. Hey, credit cards can be hacked, money can be stolen. What would be a great solution? Let's go to something that can't be taken off of a human being, and that would be a chip somewhere in their body, and now we can track. So it's not something that somebody's going to put a gun to somebody's head and say, if you don't get this chip, we're going to kill you. It's going to be something people are going to want to do.
Well, exactly, because if you go to a monetary system that is germane to your hand, okay, now you've gotten rid of prostitution. You've gotten rid of illegal drug dealing. You've got rid of the need to even have a wallet with you. The convenience and the
You're being tracked by this information system around
Right.
the world.
I know, but people say, well, because that's how they're going to sell it. Is look, we can, a prostitute can't make any money from somebody without the government knowing about it. So she can't make any. A drug dealer is only going to take so many VCRs in trade.
Yep.
Do they make VCRs anymore? They don't, do they?
No.
Well,
They make guns.
guns. Okay, can only take so many guns in trade for opiates. So you get rid of basically they'll promise you to get rid of the drug problem and this problem and all these social problems will be remedied by this chip.
Yeah.
And then they will have total control of you.
Yeah.
We all fall victim to it at some point. I mean, who doesn't have an email address, right? I mean, it's we're falling victim to the convenience and the information, and I don't know, what do you do about it? You have to be aware of it. You know, some of us are aware of it, but we deal with it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I work in an industry where, you know, it's all about information, right? I'm a programmer, and my customers want all the information that appears here. Every time someone clicks on an email or whatnot, they want to know that click took place. Oh, they opened the email that I sent them. Now I can send them a campaign email, right? Oh, we noticed you opened this email. Oh, we noticed you started shopping and you picked out these 3 items, but you didn't actually complete the sale. So we're going to send you. So my job is all about managing that information for these corporations who want to know what their customers are doing every minute of the day that they're on the computer. I'm a part of that problem. I recognize that I'm a part of that problem.
Do you feel guilty?
Sometimes I do. But, you know, it extends into, you know, you've got that, in my industry, we see banking customers, right? So we see credit card accounts and all of that stuff. We see medical information as well, all right? So we have to follow all of the banking laws and all of the HIPAA laws about making sure this data is secure, but all of that information is out there. The amount of data that is out there,
It's phenomenal.
on every single one of us, and you know, sometimes I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, this is how they're tracking it, and they want me to, you know, put this piece in place to help track it even more. And then I go and I think, wow, how much of this have I already fallen victim to just by opening an email? Right? Because I can see what they're doing. But yeah, unfortunately we're all victims, and how much are we going to put up with before we say, okay, that's it? Do we lock ourselves in a log cabin in the middle of the woods and quit the world?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people that do that, you know, like I'm going to get off the grid, or, you know, I think the Amish are ahead of all of us. they're still agriculture farmers, and
they
you know.
still won't turn the lights on at night.
I periodically think about that, but then the Bible basically tells me that anybody who would hide in the woods and save themselves,
Right.
What does it say? I don't remember the rest.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, we're
ain't
supposed to
easy.
let our light shine, and you know, we're supposed to be salt to the earth, and we're supposed to show people that, you know, we can go through these things victoriously.
Right.
You know, as believers, I mean, as a follower of Christ, I don't fear any of these things. I mean, it's written, it's going to happen. I know that I win because of Christ's victory, and I know that my future's bright. But for other people, you know, it'll be a horrific time. It'll be a horrible time, because there's going to be, you know, I mean, in Matthew chapter 24 is also a chapter in the Bible that is very end times. That's when Jesus starts laying all this stuff out. You know, nation will rise against nation, and there'll be pestilence and wars and rumors of wars and all these crazy things. And then he says something that's you know, kind of frightening. He says men's hearts will fail them for fear of the things that are coming upon the earth. And I look at just recently with this corona outbreak, and already people are like
panic.
freaking out, absolutely freaking out.
And
And
I
that's
don't-
just one little.
And I don't
virus.
necessarily believe it has to be real. Like, if you look at the coronavirus isn't that big a threat, but the way they're reporting on
Oh,
it
yeah.
scares the heck out of people.
Right.
So there could be, almost anything could be happening, and people will just be terrified the way it's reported.
Right. Right.
I mean, they're basically working people into a frenzy all the time.
Yeah, and when you have politicians saying that because of global warming, within 12 years, the humanity will be extinct. I mean, again, as somebody who firmly believes the Word of God, that can't be accurate, because we haven't reached the end times yet, and after the end times, there's still a 1,000-year period of time of Christ's reign on this earth. So we're not going anywhere for at least 1,000, plus years. So,
Right.
so again, it's alarmists, it's fear. paralyzes people into doing what you want them to do.
Correct.
It's a form of control.
It is yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's why God in the Bible has 365 fear nots, one for every day of our lives for a year.
What's that mean?
Like 365 times in the Bible, there's a fear not. Fear not, for I am with you. Fear not, for you're overcomer. Fear, all these fear nots.
Okay.
Because people tend to gravitate towards worry and fear and anxiety and all these things. And so, again and again, God says, fear not, be courageous, or, all these 365 times, one for every day of the year.
Is that really?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Oh, that's pretty great.
accurate. Yeah.
Actually, I didn't know that.
Well, we're in a leap year.
Yeah, we're in a leap year.
So you get one day to go ahead.
We're gonna,
So one day, oh, we missed it.
I guess so.
I missed my day to be scared out of my
Yeah,
mind.
that's right. That's right. Back to business as normal.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think something else that I would throw out there to help people understand, because sometimes people have enough knowledge of the Bible to make themselves dangerous, and then they get off and they say it's filled with contradictions and it's untrustworthy. So one of the things is they say, well, people have been saying it's the end days for 2,000 years. When Jesus was here, they were saying it was the end days.
Yeah.
But Peter, in one of his letters, he says, understand something, that a day with the Lord is like 1,000 years.
Yes.
And 1,000 years is like a day. So there are some scholars that played around with that a little bit, and they said, well, look at this. In the book of Genesis, it said God created everything in 6 days, and then the seventh day he rested.
Right.
If you look at that as 1,000 years, humanity has been on the earth for 6,000 years.
Right.
And 4,000 years from Adam to Jesus. From Jesus to today, 2,000 years, or the last 2 days, the end days, plural. And then the seventh day would be the 1,000 year or the millennial reign of Christ, the seventh year, which is a Sabbath. On the seventh day, God rested. On the 1,000 year reign of Christ,
right.
Everything will be at rest, everything will be at peace.
Right.
So that's just like an interesting way of understanding that, we are in the end days. We've been in those last end days for 2,000 years.
Well, I think part of it is that you're supposed to be living as if it is the end times anyway. So, like, I am sure that people that were going through the Black Plague and the Dark Ages were absolutely convinced that Jesus is coming any minute.
Right.
And I think the Bible's written a little bit abstractly for that very reason, so that any Christian at any time in history, World War II, if you didn't think Adolf Hitler was the Antichrist, come on.
Right.
That's an model of what the Antichrist will be like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he made
And
a good one.
so it's written so that no matter what age you live in, you can see things around you and trust that God is coming soon.
Yeah.
Now, I think there are so many things that are happening right now that if this ain't it, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I never hear people talk about, because they're not as intelligent as me.
Watch where you're going with this one, Gary.
So, because the thing is, I seriously never hear people talk about it, because John, when he's on the aisle, says there'll be signs in the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go outside right now and you look up, you're going to see a jet plane going into the airport.
Mm-hmm.
Now
With a sign on the side.
Yeah, with a sign on the side. But we look at that as like normal, right? Or a satellite going overhead or
Right.
something like that. Whereas for John, 2,000 years ago, if he saw a squadron of fighter jets going overhead, it would have blown his mind.
Right.
So when when it says signs in the heavens, I don't know that we aren't experiencing signs in the heavens right now, but we're just used to them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of signs in the heavens. I mean, with the Hubble telescope, we're seeing galaxies, trillions and trillions of miles away.
That's
and,
true too.
So we see a lot of signs. But it's interesting when you go back to the book of Genesis, and I love Genesis. It's such a powerful book because every doctrine in the Bible is in the book of Genesis. It's all right there, and then it unfolds for the rest of the Bible. But in the book of Genesis, when God is creating the heavens and earth, he says, he created two lights, one for the day and one for the night, the sun and the moon. And he said, let them be for days and seasons and signs.
Right.
And so the one sign, no matter where you go through the Bible, whether it's the Old Testament prophets or whether it's the New Testament, the apostles, or whether it's the book of Revelation itself, the one sign that is irrefutable before the second coming of Christ is that the sun will be darkened and the moon will turn to blood red.
Correct.
And that there's a lot of explanations of how that can happen. That can happen because of debris in the air. So a lot of people believe that it does say that towards the end there's going to be an earthquake that will shake the entire globe,
Right.
and that would probably set off a lot of volcanoes.
Yeah.
And this is just hypothetical, I'm not saying this is in the Bible, but hypothetically, if that released, let's say, the supervolcano under Yellowstone Park, which is, everybody knows it's there, it would be devastating, that would put enough debris in the air that would darken the sun during the day and make the moon look like blood at night, just from the pollutants and things in the air.
Even a war as large as World War II with today's munitions would probably do the same.
Right.
You don't necessarily need a natural disaster.
That's right, yep. The smoke, yep.
Because I wonder if a lot of the disasters they talk about in the Bible aren't actually man-made.
I think a lot of them are, and I think that the solution is man-made God's solutions. So
Right.
when we talk about all these pollutants going up in the sky, and yet it says that there will be hailstones that will be falling on people excess of 100 pounds. Well, that's those pollutants being congealed and coming back down. So God's cleaning the atmosphere. We talk about pollutant in the atmosphere.
But the hailstones could also be missiles, right?
It could be, but I mean, it specifically says hailstones. And
Right, okay.
one of the really interesting things, like if you really want to tie the Bible together and look at an overall picture, is people don't realize that the flood of Noah, that absolutely transformed this planet like nothing else ever could have. So before that time,
And that flood is depicted in every major religion on the planet.
Every culture.
It's depicted in Muslim, in the Quran. It's depicted in every major religion. So that flood, that did happen.
yeah, every culture, as a matter, the American Indians talked about a great canoe. The Chinese symbol for boat is a hand which holds something, and then the number 8, which it talks about Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. So there are 8 people on this boat. Why is that the symbol in China for boat? And yet it is. So you're right; it's in every culture. But people, when you read the Bible, you see that people had incredible longevity up until the flood, and then after the flood, their lifespans went from 700-800 years to 120.
Right.
And the reason being is because a lot of creation scientists believe that there was a canopy around this earth that condensed the atmosphere to within only 3 miles, which is the biosphere that scientists have recreated to heal diabetes, wounds like that. It brings a healing quality. So that world before the flood would have been conducive for life. After the flood, the atmosphere is now 21 miles. It's thinned out. The oxygen is less. The hydrogen is less. And we have a lot more radioactive activity from the sun, giving us cancers, giving us all kinds of things. So in the time of the book of Revelation, when we're having all these judgments, when you look carefully at what's happening, God is actually reconstructing the world back the way it was before the flood of Noah. And that's why there will be another wave of longevity. I think
Okay.
there's a scripture, I think, in Isaiah that says the child will die at 100 years old. So there will be another, time of longevity. But there's a creation scientist by the name of Dr. Glenn Bow in Glen Rose, Texas. That if any of your subscribers would ever want to do some creation science studies, it is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, we've done programs too on this about the Darwinism, and how if you really look into Darwinism, the basic information is that everything started from a spontaneous event millions and millions of years ago, where the first life just magically created. And on the program, we've talked about the profound complexity of the simplest life form on this earth is so amazing. It would be equivalent to lightning striking a primordial ooze and an F-14 popped out, fully functional, a will to live and could reproduce itself.
Right.
It is not possible.
Right.
Because they say, well, over millions. No, not over millions of years, because each component has to spontaneously be created or happen at exactly the same time. It can't partially happen,
Right.
because each part would just decay.
Right.
So it's we've talked about that on the program, but
Yeah.
we're going to have to wrap this up.
Okay. I'll
Ken,
just.
I thank you so much, because like I said, I've asked a lot of pastors to come on. I know that the difference between the Bible that you and I trust in is different than every other holy book in the world, in that it tells you the end from the beginning.
Yep.
And God says in His Word that you know I am God because I know the beginning and the end.
Correct.
So it's an amazing book. Read it, get to know Jesus Christ. How can they get in touch with you?
You can call the church at any time. It's 895-6041.
What church?
New Life Church in Raymond, New Hampshire.
Raymond.
I'd be glad to answer anybody's questions or have some good
When's
dialogue.
your service?
Our morning services on Sunday morning, we have two. The first one is 8:30 and the second one is at 11.
Which one does Darlene go to?
Usually the second service at 11.
Okay, good. I remember that.
Yeah, she's a great gal. And I believe
gosh, she's
Dave
awesome.
Dave Love goes to that service
I'll
as
try to
well.
avoid him. I'll pretend I don't know him.
That's awesome.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
He's such a nice
Yeah.
guy. But yeah, so Dan Nitsa, does he still go there, or is he too far away now?
We see them every once in a while, but I think they've moved.
Yeah, they moved
and-
out near Milford, so.
Okay, yeah, so it's a little bit of a drive, but maybe once every 2 months, him and his wife swing by, and great people.
We were freshman legislators together in 2000.
Yeah.
We both got elected in 2000. And I was very jealous of Dan Nitsa, because his seat number was 357.
Oh, nice. And there's probably not a 556, is there?
No, there's no, well, 556. I think there might be. Hey, we gotta go.
Okay.
Ken,
Thank you so much.
thank
for
you
having
very much. You're awesome.
All right. Thank you, Ken.
And we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Check out Wilson.